Welcome to Grow Virtually, an online horticultural educational program presented by the Master Gardener Volunteers of Cobb County. Under the guidance of the University of Georgia Cooperative Extension Service, we grow gardeners.
Landscape without pouring a ton of money into it. Um, the right plants, softscape and hardscape features and decorative outdoor ideas, it can definitely upgrade your outdoor space without breaking the bank. So we're going to go through this and talk about different landscaping ideas where we can save money and design an attractive yard. So I like using recycled materials. This is something that when I first moved to Atlanta, my wife had me dumpster diving behind the Targets and the Home Depots and the Lowe's, getting pallets that had been discarded. So I would go and grab a lot of these pallets, and you can build a lot of different outdoor things with these type of things. You can also make just decorations with the recycled materials like that. You can also use these inexpensive pressure-treated landscape timbers that you can find at your big box stores that can be used to create beds. One of the nice things about those, like I said, they're relatively inexpensive. I get a lot of calls oftentimes saying, well, they're pressure treated. They've been, injected with this material. Is it going to cause any issues with the plants? And it's not. You're really never going to have any issues with that. So there's nothing you need to be concerned about as far as being sucked up into the plants, even if it's a vegetable garden. The vegetables won't bring in any materials from these boards, from these timbers, and they can, if they're pressure timbered, they can actually last a long time. But this is something that I actually saw a friend of mine build. He took a recycled pallet and turned it into a garden bench and did some interesting things with that. And they, like I said, they had a little outdoor living space where they used recycled pallets to make just some different, like furniture with these recycled pallets. So, like I said, oftentimes you can find these at different box stores. A lot of these different stores, they use these pallets and more, oftentimes they're just discarding them, just getting rid of them. So you can definitely go and get these and do some really creative things with these guys. Another way to make landscaping less expensive is to use perennials instead of using expensive annuals. Annuals cost a lot of money. And if you think about it over time, you're replacing them, twice a year. You plant cool season annuals in the fall, say, late September, October, with pansies, violas, snapdragons, and things like that. And then when we get into this time of the year, everybody's yanking out those cool season annuals that they paid a bunch of money for back in the fall. They're just yanking them out and throwing them away, and they're putting in warm season annuals. Well, perennials are a much better idea, in my opinion, to create filler plants that can come back every year. There's so many to choose from. Great, different flowers. The nice thing about it is usually they're less maintenance. They require less fertilization and watering compared to their annual friends. So I'm just going to go through a few here. Perennial phlox is a great perennial plant. Beautiful flowers, great plants, definitely need to be utilized more often. Butterfly weed, Aeschylus is also, like I said, don't let the weed in the name fool you. This also draws a lot of our pollinators and our butterflies. So if you like butterflies, they will flock to this. So and really add some enrichment to your garden. Really add some interest into it. So butterfly weed is one that's just really amazing. You can find it at your garden centers, and guess what? It comes back every single year. You don't have to yank it out and replace it. Black-eyed Susans, I think this is a really, it's a big favorite of people. Everybody knows about black-eyed Susans, but again, it's a perennial. So it's not something that you have to pull out and replace every year. Coreopsis is another one. Really beautiful flower. Should be utilized more often. I think it's an underutilized. I think perennials as a whole are underutilized in home landscapes. I think we rely way too much on annual flowers. So, using things like perennials, we can do a lot of other things with. Coneflower, purple coneflower. They actually come in multiple different colors. Again, they come back every single year once we put them out. So really consider using perennials. Gaillardia, another beautiful flower that's a perennial, comes back every single year. I should have taken a picture of it, but I'm kind of looking out my window here. I planted dianthus around my mailbox, where in the past, here at my house, I've used annuals to kind of plant things around my mailbox. Well, we planted dianthus out there, and it has a nice kind of foliage, kind of a blue-green foliage on it. And then every spring, it just flushes up. You get all the little flowers on it. It's just beautiful. Probably should have put a picture of it here around my mailbox in this presentation. Just didn't have time to. But perennials are wonderful plants that should be utilized more often. Now, if you are not familiar with the UGA Extension Publications page, you need to be. And as Joanne said at the beginning, we're going to send you some useful links. But this extension.uga.edu/publications.html site, there are so many, every University of Georgia Extension publication is on that website, and they are free of charge. They're all in PDF format. You can right click on that particular publication you're interested in. And the beautiful thing about it is it has a search bar. I was actually given a presentation earlier today on mushrooms, and I showed them how you could go to this particular website for UGA Extension Publications and type in mushrooms, and it would just pull up a ton of publications free of charge. They give you factual information based on UGA Extension research that's been done. The link below is actually a link for a flowering perennials publication that goes over many perennials that are available that grow well in Georgia. I'm going to refer back to this UGA Extension Publications website frequently as I go through this particular presentation. Ground covers. Ground covers are cost effective, and you generally only need to plant a few of them, and then they will spread. Ground covers generally don't require much watering or fertilization, and watering and fertilization is an added cost. I mean, if you have a landscape and you've pouring water onto it, you know how much that water bill goes up every month if you're out there just pouring water over everything. But some great examples, some ground covers that we can use. Liriope, some people call it Liriope, but I always go with Liriope. Pachysandra, Asiatic jasmine, Ophiopogon. Ophiopogon is the true monkey grass, a little thin-bladed. Some people call it mondo grass, but Ophiopogon is a great ground cover. Autumn fern, cast iron plant, heuchera, Helleborus. Now, Helleborus is one of those you can almost get into trouble with, because Helleborus, once it starts seeding, that will really take over an area. But hosta, woodland phlox, they all thrive as ground covers. And many of these, really starting from pretty much all of them, will thrive in the shade. So they can do a really, really good job in the shade. And guess what? There's a UGA Extension publication for ground covers as well. Plant native species. Natives have become kind of a buzzword in the horticultural world over the last couple of years, but there's a big reason why natives have really come back into the fold. Natives in our area, they allow you to cut back on watering and fertilization. Again, two big expenses in the landscape. They're very well adapted to our soil. They're very, very well adapted to our climate. Uh, Natives in general are much more disease and pest resistant, so they will thrive without this extra care having to be taken. They're not going to get a lot of these diseases and insects. They're very, like you said, used to this type of environment. So you're not going to have to go out there and start pouring fungicides on these guys or really having to take extra care with them. They also benefit the local ecosystem by preventing erosion, and additionally, they help local wildlife and pollinators find a safe and abundant spot for their needs. So natives are an amazing thing. And again, guess what? There's a UGA extension publication for native species as well. So going back here to our extension.uga.edu/publications, if you're on your computer right now, you can certainly go ahead and Google. If you go to Google, you can do Google UGA extension publications and you'll find that website. And again, the beauty of it is their search bar actually works. So purchase cheap plants. Seek out sources for cheap plants. Most nurseries will have a section where they have plants on clearance because plants are like anything, like any commodity. If you go to a grocery store, they're not, they're going to be blemished items and things like that that they generally just throw away. Well, at a nursery, they're not going to throw away a plant if it starts not looking, ready to go and primed for the time. But what they'll do is they'll have a clearance section. And I know the Pike Nursery that's closest to me, which is on Barrett Parkway, they always have a clearance section, and they usually cut the price of these plants more than in half. And so that's a great place to get plants. They may not look aesthetically pleasing at the time that they have put them on clearance, but if you think about it, you just want it to be alive. You can nurse it back to health, and then you're going to have a beautiful plant come. And I'll be honest with you, probably 2/3 of the plants in my landscape are all plants that I actually went to Pike Nursery and got on their clearance rack. My wife calls it my zombie garden because they looked half dead when I bought it. And but now they're just beautiful specimens here in our landscape. The National Arbor Day Foundation often runs specials on affordable trees and seedlings too. So you can check with the National Arbor Day Foundation and they'll sit there and oftentimes have affordable trees and seedlings. And then, as Joanne mentioned at the very beginning, we're having a plant sale here at Jim Miller Park Friday and Saturday. That's a great place to go pick up plants. A lot of these plants were divided, and put into containers and brought in to be sold at this plant sale at Jim Miller Park. So definitely check out local plant sales. Then this is not the only one. Oftentimes there are a lot of plant sales throughout, sometimes horticulture clubs at local high schools and places like that will have plants on sale that you can purchase at really pennies on the dollar. Here's my big favorite. This is really my favorite, which is propagating your own plants. Many, particularly your woody plants, can be easily propagated in your own yard. There's a process known as layering, and this is where I miss out on talking to a live audience. Being in a room where I can interact with people, but there's a process known as layering. Layering is, how many of y'all have ever thrown a brick on a hydrangea or an azalea? You put a brick on one of the branches, and then that branch eventually roots out, develops roots at one of its nodes, which is a node is an area where the leaves are coming out. They'll eventually put out roots down there, and then you can kind of dig it up and you can transplant it to another part of your yard. It's a propagation process known as layering. You can do that with pretty much almost any woody shrub in your yard. Cuttings are also a viable source using rooting hormone. Rooting hormone is basically if you dip and grow. That's what I'm talking about with that type of material. You take cuttings. Usually you're taking tender cuttings, that of this is a great time to take cuttings because we have all this new growth. It's very tender. You take cuttings of your material out there. What you can do is you can go out and get like Dip and Grow or some of these other rooting hormones at Pikes and other. You can buy it online and on Amazon, and you can actually stick cuttings of plants that you like. You generally want to do it with that new tender growth that's coming out. But that's really a great source of plant material that you can sit there and root yourself and put it in your yard. You do need to be careful with patented plants, though. Like a lot of the, thinking about patented plants, I'm talking about like Encore azaleas. Encores are all patented. And but here's my little thing: if they don't know, it doesn't matter. At the same time, if you're doing it for your own yard, I don't see the harm in it at all. But also check with your neighbors. Your neighbors may have a lot of different plant material where you can sit there and, hey, can I throw a brick on this plant and see if I can get something to root up here, and I'll dig it up and then I'll move it to my yard after it started rooting out and plant there. I can't tell you how many hydrangeas that I have in my yard that my mom back in Alabama threw a brick on top of. Hydrangeas are one of my all-time favorites, and they are so easily propagated by layering. And probably 2/3 of the hydrangeas that are in my yard are ones that my mom threw a brick on top of or something, and that rooted out on their own. And then I threw into a little container, and then I brought with me up here to Atlanta in the back of my pickup truck. But your neighbors can be great sources of different plant material as well. So check with your neighbors. Ask them, hey, can I propagate this? Can I do something with this? And oftentimes you can get a lot of great plants in that way. Xeriscaping. This is another way to really cut down on the amount of what you're putting out. This is not so much, it may not be cheap at the start, but it's going to end up being a lot cheaper as you go along. So what xeriscaping is, started out in more arid climates, but has begun spreading throughout the country and the entire world because, hey, if you think about it, Georgia's in a water war right now with Alabama and Florida because of the Chattahoochee. And so, we get a lot of situations where we have a drought in the summer and we cannot water, but on odd days or even days. And so what xeriscaping is getting plants that are drought resistant. They're going to have a lot of drought resistance to them. You can group plants with similar watering requirements together for more efficient watering. And another big thing is this. Turf grass is probably one of the biggest wastes of water and fertilization and things like that there probably is. So consider replacing your turf grass with a combination of hardscape and drought tolerant or drought resistant ground covers or other plants. That can really certainly reduce your water bill. Drop that down, and again, it's becoming more and more of a thing. I had a master gardener in this past class who what he wanted to do was replace all of his turf with perennials and put a bunch of different plants out there and ground covers, so he didn't have to sit there and get the $300 water bill every single summer when he had to pour a ton of water onto his turf grass. Another thing you can do is amend your soil with compost and organic matter. This can sometimes help make it better draining, and it also makes it better able to absorb smaller amounts of water. So the water doesn't just roll off when you're putting it on there. It makes it much easier to absorb this water. And again, when xeriscaping, you'll never guess that there is also a UGA extension publication for xeriscaping. A big thing I like to do, and I do this in my own yard, the fact of the matter is fertilization really, in my opinion, is way overrated. For the most part, most of your plants can get nearly almost as many nutrients as they need by using compost instead of purchasing commercial fertilizers. More turf grass, shrubs, things like that, that people are constantly throwing fertilizer at, are usually getting way more than they need. But if you're going to get serious about landscaping on a budget, I would definitely suggest building a compost bin. One of the easy things you can do, is probably one of the first things you should do if you're going to be landscaping on a budget. Then you can just place kitchen scraps, not any of your fats, oils, or greases, but just chicken scrap, I say chicken, kitchen scraps, raked leaves, mowed grass. Put that into your recycle bin that you build. And guess what? There's a UGA extension publication about building a recycle bin. Then you just water it occasionally, you mix it and turn it occasionally, and then you're going to have a ready source for free soil amendments. As those break down, a lot of the nutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, things like that, are actually going to leach down into that soil as they break down, because plants are the ultimate recyclers. And as they break down, they'll release a lot of these nutrients. So instead of actually having to go buy fertilizer, you can make your own. Adding mulch to your beds. This is actually a big thing. Mulches are great. They not only add some visual intrigue to the beds, at a relatively low cost, they help retain moisture. So again, not having to water as often. They insulate roots of your desirable plants. They provide a buffer zone between the plants and any turf area, so you can avoid, I like to call it lawnmower disease or weed eater disease, where you end up having weed eaters, lawnmowers come up and hit the trunk of plants and cause a ton of damage. And they also help reduce weeds. But keep this in mind. It's kind of like Advil. Um, a little bit and the right amount is okay, but you don't need to take a ton of it. So 2 to 3, maybe 4 inches of mulch is maximum. 4 inches maximum. Don't do the mulching volcanoes where you put in like 8 to 10 inches of mulch and you have it going on the trunks of trees and things like that, because that actually will only exacerbate problems and can really cause a lot of disease issues. Soil testing. This is something we do at our office. We charge $9 for soil test at the Cobb County Extension Office. But soil tests can give you an exact starting point, letting you know what your phosphorus levels are, what your potassium levels are, what the calcium, magnesium, and zinc levels are. And it'll also tell you what your soil pH is, which is extremely important. Uh, Here's what I say about soil pH. If you get a soil test done, the soil pH is the most important number that is on that soil test. And it's because if the soil pH is too low or if it's too high, you can have all the nutrients in the world in that soil, but it becomes completely unavailable. So what I kind of use as an analogy is, if you think about it, like if your soil pH is out of whack, it'd be tantamount to going to your local Publix or Kroger and starving to death in the middle of the produce section because you forgot your debit card at home. You have all these nutrients, you have all this stuff that you need to survive that are all around you, but you can't buy them. So if your soil pH needs to be in the right level, and when you get a soil test done, you can see what that level is and you can adjust it accordingly, whether it needs to go up or whether it needs to go down a little bit. I'll tell you this, it's the best $9 you'll ever spend in your landscape, as a fact. And you can avoid spending money on nutrients you don't need. And at the same time, you can adjust that pH so that it's at the right level to make sure that your plants can absorb those nutrients that are available to it. This is a typical, if you do a soil test with UGA extension, this is what you're going to get back. I don't know if you can see my little cursor bar here, but What we test for is, again, phosphorus, potassium, calcium, magnesium, and zinc. And again, here's that most important number, the soil pH. And for most of our landscape crops, landscape plants, woody shrubs, azaleas, camellias, things like that, what we like the pH to be is between about 5.5 and 6.5. So again, with this area, it's kind of perfect there at that 6.1. One thing you'll not see on a soil test is nitrogen. We do not test for nitrogen because by the time you get the results back from your soil test, which generally take about 7 to 10 days, whatever nitrogen was there is gone. Nitrogen is so volatile, it's either leached down into the soil or it's volatilized into the atmosphere. So in case you ever wonder why we don't test for nitrogen in a soil test, that's why. But if you do a soil test, you can see this one was for a common Bermuda lawn. You can actually put on there, I want to test for annuals. I want to test for perennials. I want to test for ornamental crops. And you'll get recommendations back from there. Below this soil test, down here below that would be actual recommendations on, anything you need to do to amend either that pH or any kind of fertilizer that needs to be put on there. So again, don't guess, do a soil test, and you can find out where you actually need to be instead of just going out there and guessing and doing what I call spray and pray. Now I'm going to get into a little bit of proper planting and establishment. Healthy plants withstand just about anything. The plants that are healthy, plants are a lot like people. They really are, in the sense that healthy plants don't have disease issues near as much as plants that are struggling, that are weak. And when I say plants are a lot like people, you think about when we just go back to COVID, people that had real issues with COVID were people that had a lot of comorbidities. They weren't in good health. They weren't in good shape. So they were much more likely to get that, disease and then have negative outcomes from it. Well, plants are the same way. They really are. So plants that are stressed they're going to be the first things that insects hit. They're going to be the first thing that fungi look out for because they're easy targets. So if you're planting, what you always want to do is dig your planting hole, particularly on woody trees and shrubs, 2.5 to 3 times as wide as that root ball is, but never any deeper. Always score that root ball with pruners, a knife, or a shovel to cut through those circling roots. And I got some pictures to kind of talk about what I'm talking about there, kind of illustrate what I'm talking about there. Again, always make sure that the top of the root ball is level. I actually like to have it a little bit above the existing soil grade, never deeper than that existing soil grade. If you want to kill a plant quickly, plant it too deeply. Always tamp in your backfill. I use my feet. I'll press in the soil around there. I'll push that soil back in. And then I water thoroughly to remove any air pockets because roots don't like to grow through air. Believe it or not, they don't like to grow through air. They want to grow through soil. And so you want to water in thoroughly to remove any of those air pockets. A big thing here, minimize pruning when you're planting. Actually, plants have a hierarchy when it comes to what is important to these plants. I joke around oftentimes and say plants are like frat boys. The first thing they think about is reproduction. So, what when a plant is reproducing, what is it doing? It's putting out flowers. Flowers are the most important thing to a plant. The next thing that's most important to a plant are leaves, because leaves are what's making their food. You get to the very bottom of that totem pole, and it's the roots. The roots do not care one bit, or the plant doesn't care one bit whatsoever about those roots. So when we prune, what is that plant wanting to do? It's wanting to replace whatever you pruned off of it. is wanting to basically replace whatever you took off instead of doing what it should do, which is focusing on those roots and getting those roots established. So minimize pruning when you're planting, and then plant at the right time of the year. Fall. Fall is the absolute best time to plant anything. And the reason for that, again, is because of its roots. It's when we think about fall, it's getting cooler. Temperatures are getting temperatures are getting cooler. We're getting a little bit more rain. But guess what? The soil is still warm. So there's much less taxing the top of these plants. It's not really, we're not having to water it all the time to just basically replace what the sun and transpiration is pulling out of these plants like it would in summer. In the fall, we don't have to do that. But the soil is still warm, so those roots are still, they're going to start getting established. So fall is the best time to plant. Winter is probably your next best time. As we get into spring, people think spring is for planting. It's really not. But at the same time, yeah, if we're going to do it, it's probably the third best time to do some planting. But again, it's any of these are much better than summer, because summer, all you're going to be doing is pouring water on plants, pouring water on plants. It's going to be a lot more intensive management and maintenance. And you're just trying to keep this plant watered, and it becomes a lot more stressful for a plant. So again, this is an example of circling roots. If you pull a plant out of its container, you can see these roots are circling. You're going to want to get in here and like I said, I like to use pruners. What I really like to use is like a carpet cutter. It has like a very sharp carpet cutter that has a little beak on it, and I'll just go through and start shredding those roots on the side. I use shovels cut into the side, just cut through those roots. So those roots really are able to, they'll branch out from there, and they will start getting into the native soil. Another big thing to mention about this, when we're talking about, this is a good proper planting diagram. But if you start thinking about when we're digging into the soil around here, which is clay, many times you'll notice that when you go in with a shovel, you create a very smooth side. That's referred to as a glazed sidewall. But if it's very smooth, you're going to want to take your shovel and kind of chop in to the side, kind of rough up that side so it's not super smooth. If it stays very smooth like that, what ends up happening is that plant will act like it's in a container. It'll hit those glazed sidewalls, and those roots will just start spinning, just like you've just planted it into a big container. So chop up the sides of that hole that you've dug. And if you notice, this is not a square up and down hole. It's dug more like a bowl. That's the best way to do it, because the vast majority of your roots are going to come out here in the top several inches, because roots need oxygen just as much as they need water. The deeper you typically go down into an area, the less oxygen there is. So the wider it is at the top, that's where these roots are going to start settling in, is in these areas. But as you see right here, the top of this is level with that existing grade. I hope you notice that. So the top of this root ball is level with that existing grade. And then again, add 2 to 4 inches of mulch, but no more. And do not add this mulch. Do not put this mulch right up here, around the top of the plant, because that can end up holding moisture up against the sides of the plant, which can end up causing the plant to stress. And again, when we start causing the plant distress, we're going to have all kinds of issues. And it's going to weaken the plant. It's going to become much more susceptible to disease. It's going to become much more susceptible to stress. And that's going to make it a much more appetizing thing to insects, harmful insects. Again, once you've planted it, water in very thoroughly. You want to make sure you get in there and remove all those air pockets so those roots can start growing out and getting itself established. The more you do this, this is actually going to save you a lot of money in the long term. So you're not having to go out there and pour fungicides all over these plants and trying to keep them healthy. And again, when I talk about pruning plants properly, when it's time to prune, you need to make sure you're doing it at the right time of year. I have a little thing I call a May rule. If a plant blooms, if it's a flowering plant and it blooms May or before, so we're right in the middle of this right now. Those flower buds that you're seeing on all those azaleas right now, those flower buds that you're going to see on the magnolias here coming up in May, all those flower buds were set last year. So if we go around pruning azaleas at the beginning of spring, in late February, early March, what you're going to end up doing is cutting off all those flower buds. If a plant blooms after May, so think about crepe myrtles. Why do you think they're out there butchering crepe myrtles right now? Please don't butcher your crepe myrtles. I might go ahead and just mention that. Please don't butcher your crepe myrtles. But crepe myrtles bloom in the summer, so they all bloom on new wood. They're going to set their flower buds later this year. So again, prune at the right time of year. And I might add with crepe myrtles, if you're going to plant crepe myrtles, they're great. Do not prune them pretty much at all. Plant the right size, put it in the right place, and then just leave that guy alone. Always prune on the outside of a branch collar. And I've got an illustration here in a minute to kind of talk about that. But you always want to prune on the outside of a branch collar. And if you're removing tree limbs, you want to use what's called a three-part cut method for removing those tree limbs. And again, I'll go over that with a couple of illustrations here in a second. And then finally, never shear. These are called heading cuts. I really don't like to shear on any woody shrubs because this creates heading cuts and then you get a lot of issues. So let me just go ahead and get to the illustration so I can explain that. So if you look here, this is basically a branch collar right here. You'll see kind of a wrinkled up section. When you do a three-part cut on these tree limbs, what you want to do is go in here and make that first cut on the underside. You're just going to go in a little ways. Basically, you just got to get through the cambium here. The second cut you're going to make is going to be on the outside of this first cut. You're going to remove the vast majority of that limb by making this second cut. You're just going to cut it all the way off. The reason we do this is because if you did this second cut first, it's going to end up, if there's a lot of weight on this branch, it'll break down, and then it's going to end up stripping the cambium. It can end up stripping it all the way down the trunk of this tree, which can create a giant open wound, which again will cause a lot of stress on that plant, an opening for diseases and insects. And then again, that third cut is going to be right here, just on the outside of that branch collar. Never make a flush cut. A flush cut, you will have all kinds of issues with your trees. Basically, if you've ever seen a tree that has a big hollow area on it, what ended up happening was they flush cut here instead of cutting on the outside of this branch collar. What happens here now is that cambium will roll over and completely close that wound. So if you have pruning paints at home, or if you bought any of the pruning paints, just as soon as we get done with this webinar, please go and just throw those in the garbage. And then again, when I say prune back to a point of origin, what I'm talking about is go back to a bud. Don't ever just cut in the middle of a branch. You always want to go back to a lateral or a bud or another side branch, just above another side branch. This is what's considered naturalistic pruning. It really creates a very natural shape of the plant that you're growing, and you don't get all those suckers. So if you're familiar with suckers, what happens if we sit there and make a cut just in the middle of a branch that's not at another point of origin or another bud, you will end up getting all kinds of suckers from what are basically dormant buds. You just get this mass growth of suckers that pop out here and that are very superficially attached or very weakly attached to that particular shrub or tree.
We hope that you will find our information informative and helpful. Thanks for watching, and please remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel.